Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Jacob Jans with the Writers Workshop at Authors Publish. Today, I'm pleased to introduce a lecture by Jennifer Givon. The topic, Writing from the Upside Down, Stranger Things, Duende, and Subverting Expectations. When Jennifer proposed the topic to us, she shared a wonderful quote from Tracy K. Smith. Skill is only useful to the extent that it adds courage and agility to intuition. I suspect that this lecture will answer many of the questions that I have in terms of getting out of my own head when I sit down to write, and two, the ideas that are both compelling and publishable. So I'm really looking forward to this myself. Jennifer is an award-winning poet and novelist. She's won an NEA fellowship as well as a Penn Rosenthal fellowship. She's a fantastic poet, as some of you may know. She's also a writing coach. For those who are interested in exploring more of what she has to say here, her book of prompts, Regenerate, is available to purchase. There should be a link below the video. Her most recent novel is Jubilee, which Publishers Weekly said rewards readers with an intense and fiery story. It's wonderful to be presenting such an established and thoughtful author today. So thank you, Jennifer Givon, for being here and for sharing a lecture with us today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jacob, and wonderful to be here with all of you. I'm looking forward to it. So I'll go ahead and share my slideshow with you. Jacob, can you see that okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
All right, awesome. So I'm going to present today to you a little bit of what I've learned about writing into the upside down. Another word that I use for the upside down and that I'll often refer to when I'm coaching writers or just trying to dig into the deep, hard work while I'm writing my own poems, essays, and novels is the underbelly. This is the seamy, liminal place from which sometimes our most potent ideas can emerge, but I know that it can be difficult to get down there. And so a few years back on Netflix, I was flipping through the channels and came upon Stranger Things, and my brother and I started watching it. And, you know, as I was watching, I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a rife metaphor for the writing process. And I feel like this is what I go through as a poet, as a novelist, every time I'm delving into a new idea or I'm trying to tap into and access something that, you know, right now is just a nascent idea, kind of amorphous. And I know that I have to get in there and dig really deep to find, you know, dredge up the difficult things that my subconscious is like hanging on to really tightly and won't let go. And so I thought, let me build a workshop around this for other writers. So here we go. What is the upside down? For those of you who have never seen the show, I'm going to give just a tiny synopsis. Those of you who have, bear with me. I'm going to give no spoilers away. I'm going to try not to anyway. Forgive me if I do. So this is Nancy Byers. She is the sister of Will Byers, who is the protagonist of the show, along with their mother, Joyce Byers. And they find themselves as a family in this rural 1980s setting in middle America of this horror story where Will is kidnapped and disappears. And as his family is looking for him, Joyce and Nancy and friends in the town are looking for him. They stumble upon this place that they call the Upside Down. Why do they call it this? It's a place of decay and death, a plane out of phase, a place with monsters. It is right next to you and you don't even see it. So you can see Nancy there. She's leaning against a tree. This tree is the entrance to the Upside Down. And you can see it's mucus, membrane-like, you know, and when she goes into it, it's dark, it's ugly, it's disturbing. And there are literal monsters inside. So we writers can think of the tool of Duende. It's an idea as entrance to the upside down. The Duende is the force deep inside us that must be dredged up from the dark, murky recesses. Okay, let me tell you a little bit more about the background of Duende in case this is unfamiliar for you. So Federico Garcia Lorca came up with this idea of Duende, and it's a little goblin, Lorca says. Early 20th century Spanish poet Lorca envisioned the Duende from the Spanish word meaning little goblin, guardian of the mystery, the roots fastened in the mire that we all know and all ignore. A writer under the influence of Duende must submit to spontaneous creation or else be destroyed by it. The Duende is a dark energy residing deep within the writer. She or he, they are the spirit of creation who does not come at all unless he sees that death is possible. One must deeply contemplate the meaning and nature of death in one's work to channel Duende. So Lorca says that we have to battle with this hobgoblin and battle death itself. But in the underbelly or the upside down, sometimes what we see that we're battling with is the beast who turns out to be ourselves, the shadow side of ourselves. And it's not necessarily a battle. Sometimes when we go down into the Duende, we can think of that as the underbelly or the upside down. What we're actually doing is learning to accept ourselves and forgive ourselves. It's not necessarily something to suppress and bleed away, but to embrace, honor, and respect and understand. I like to think of the Duende as more of the idea of a golem, right? And so in mythology, a golem is something that is fashioned to represent someone, to be the likeness of someone, kind of zombie-like in that way, in that they are, you know, an unliving creature that is brought to life in the likeness of someone else, and to serve a purpose, oftentimes with dark or shadow intent. And so I like to think of when I go down into the underbelly in my psyche, you know, as I'm writing, as I'm planning a poem or a story, and knowing that what I'm going to battle down there is something that will oftentimes look like me, act like me, remember like me, but it's this part of myself that I have been disconnected with. And so there's an uncanny feeling in connecting. I just realized I should have put onto the slideshow one of my favorite one of my favorite artists, Frida Kahlo. She's my goddess and kind of patron saint, Santa Frida. And so if you go look her up, the Two Fridas is the painting that I'm thinking of, in which you have Frida side by side, and one Frida is holding the heart that's been removed from the other Frida. And so sometimes as a writer, that's how I think of myself. And so I'm able to craft protagonists in my stories and speakers in my poems that use oftentimes the first person I, you know, and so seeing through the eye, and it's the eye of subjective understanding so that we can build a link with our readers who, you know, see the eye and are already primed for story, like, oh, you're going to tell me something about yourself, right? So I think of those protagonists and those eyes as a place then where I can channel the golem, right? The place where I can channel the darkness that would be too difficult, too painful, too upsetting to release during my daily life. I'm a mother. I have 2 children. And when I first started contemplating this and really becoming serious about my writing craft, and I was delving into dark, sometimes traumatic material, my children were very young. And, you know, it was my complete responsibility to make sure that they were cared for. So delving into these really sticky, ugly places, the monstrous places, sometimes would have overtaken me if I hadn't created these speakers, created these protagonists who then were vessels in which I could pour all of the ugliness that I was dredging up from the underbelly or the upside down. So that is one technique in terms of thinking about the Duende and how we can get that onto the page, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it hurts. Duende loves the edge of the wound. In his famous lecture, Theory and Play of the Duende, first given in Argentina in 1933, Lorca writes that Duende loves the edge, the wound. Duende comes from the dark sounds and flies with the wings of rusty knives. Duende haunts death's door, says Lorca, and that's precisely where we'll be knocking today. As we approach death's door, we will gain entrance to the underbelly, or the upside down, as I've said. So this is an image from Stranger Things. Here we have Joyce Byers, the mother, who's lighting the wall, which has been deemed the Ouija wall, to communicate through the broken seam in dimensions into the upside down to find her missing son. So it was a really ingenious way of communicating, because even though the barrier is permeable and you can get through, you have to figure out where the entrance is. And I feel like that is such an apt metaphor for us as writers. Like, we know our material is there. Either we experienced it in our lives, we dreamt about it, it's been haunting us. Every once in a while we'll catch a glimpse of this idea, or it's something that is, we're obsessed with, where it's a compulsion and we think about it all the time, but we just don't know how to access the language that we feel like will get onto the page in a crafted way that we can publish, right? We feel like if I pull this up, it's just going to be an ugly jumble of words, because that's how it feels when it's down there in the underbelly, in the upside down. So Will Byer was caught in the upside down, and his mother, searching for him, realized that he was communicating with lights. So lights would flicker every time Will was trying to communicate with her. So she painted in, those big bold letters with her black paint on the wall and set up the Christmas lights, and everyone thought she was going completely mad. But she then asked him a question, and he told her, run. I'm not supposed to give you spoilers, but I'm sorry, I'm giving you spoilers. And then she knew that the monster was then coming into her world. So it seems like the monster then can break through and create any barrier, but humans have a harder time finding the entrance to the underbelly. But I loved this idea of the lights on the wall. And I have a few suggestions later on. I'm going to give you some writing prompts and some tips. But the main point here, well, first of all, just a Ouija wall is awesome. And I forgot I was going to get out my Ouija board for you. I don't think I have it. I have a Stranger Thing. It's a Ouija board that my brother gave me for Christmas a few years back. And I wish that this were an in-person class so that we could, try to communicate with the upside down together. But so I think of tapping into that material, through a kind of a Ouija board type of way. Sometimes we have to get creative about how we're able to tap into it. One of the ways that I find for myself of being able to tap into those spaces is I will have rituals for myself that let my brain know, okay, now is the time that we're going into this dark space, right? And so, for instance, I might light a candle. This is a guardian angel. I've heard, or I've read, that Stephen King puts Rocky and Bullwinkle on his computer every time he leaves it, right? So it's kind of like the haunted, horrific work won't follow him. But so different writers will have their rituals that will signify the beginning or the end of their writing journey for that day or that period, right? And so for myself, I'll have a ritual that will signify how I get down in there. And a lot of times that will be something like loud music. It'll be classical music a lot of times, like Vitamin String Quartet or the piano guys. And so they're playing contemporary music, but it's just classical so that I'm not distracted by the lyrics, right? And so that's one way that I found, and I just pump it up. And then, sometimes I'll even close my eyes. I have to open them every once in a while to make sure I'm not typing gibberish, but just for a little while, I'll close my eyes so that I can really get in there. Another way would be something like lighting a candle or smelling something from, your yard outside or your fridge, because smell is such a powerful sensory trigger that so many writers underestimate or forget to incorporate in their poems and stories. And so we can use that as writers to tap into and access a way down into the upside down. just like Joyce Byers' Lights. So Jacob mentioned the Tracy K. Smith quote, and she has a beautiful poetry collection that I recommend called Duende. But this actually came from an article that's up online. And so you can just Google Tracy K. Smith Duende, and you'll find this article. I'm going to read this in full because I think she explains it so well. So possession by the Duende is paid in part by embossing the writer's work with the mercurial, the hellbent, the fierce, the undeniable aching truth. Tracy K. Smith says that summoning the Duende in our poems means that we're struggling not merely to write well-crafted and surprising poems, so much as to survive in two worlds at once, the world we see and the world beyond or within this one that glimpse after glimpse, we attempt to decipher and confirm. It's this idea of surviving in two worlds that we'll focus on, keeping our hearts in both the familiar and the unfamiliar as we tread the precarious ledge of our deepest wounds, searching for all haunted and monstrous things we can bring back up with us to cast new shadows on our daily lives. So, do we have to write about darkness? Do we have to write about the monstrous? Do we have to write about trauma? Absolutely not, right? My mom is always asking me, why can't you write me a happy poem? You know, and sometimes I think it's almost like she's asking, why can't you write me something that proves I did right by you? You know, why can't you write something that proves I was a good mom? You know, and, you know, on one hand, absolutely, we should be writing joy. I love the poet Ross Gay, and he has a book called The Catalog of Unabashed Things, in which he is writing joy on every page. And I absolutely do try to inject joy and, you know, a life well lived, you know, in the present moment into my poems as well. But, you know, a lot of times people think that the shadow side and the light side, you know, the light and the dark, are on these binary poles and they're in opposition to each other. Today just so happens to be the fall equinox, which is, you know, perfect for what we're talking about today, because what I'm suggesting is that, you know, the light and the dark are actually one and the same. It's kind of like the yin and yang, you know, or the Ouroboros, the symbol of the serpent eating its own tail, right? And it suggests like the eternal cycle and that you can't have one without the other. And so I have notes on this I wanted to share with you. So how do we climb down into the upside down when it's the world that's beneath or parallel to ours and has real repercussions in our world? That's the point of what I want us to get to in the upside down. What happens there in the upside down affects what happens in our world. So part of why we can't just write joy is that it would come across as insincere, right? It's not authentic. And so part of the joy is also that we have either moved past a very difficult experience or we're finding joy despite a difficult time in our lives, right? I mean, we need that darkness sometimes as a complement to the light. Society often likes to pretend that they're separate. There's the shadow side and the light, the respectable and the disreputable, the rich and the poor, success and failure. But if you lift a rock, right? So you just got that, it looks maybe polished and lovely on one side of it, but you lift it up, you'll see that it's teeming with a cosmos of dirt and mud and worms and microbial life, you know, that's just swirling around in there. You hold a whole world in your hand, a whole ecosystem. It's not binaries or poles, it's part of the same cycle, one and the same. So if you have felt like you've been stuck in your writing, or, you know, maybe you've been sending work out, but it's getting rejected, I suggest, well, first of all, rejection is just a natural part of the writing process, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything wrong. You know, it's biased and it's personal, subjective. So keep submitting, keep writing your work. But if you have felt like you have hit a kind of a standstill, right? Knowing how to delve deeply into the underbelly and the upside down can potentially give your work a depth that it didn't have before, right? And so you're going to open it up to so many different ideas. I can't stop writing. I've written book after book after book after book, and people often ask me, how are you so prolific? So let me tell you right now that one of the main reasons that I am so prolific is that I am dauntless as a writer. I am not ever unwilling to go and dig down deep where it hurts, right? Sometimes I do need to have the support of a therapist or my family, or I need to take a break and go watch a ridiculous show on Netflix. Stranger Things is not a ridiculous show, by the way. It's wonderful. But sometimes I'll go watch just a stupid show and give myself a break. But then I know when I get back to the page, it's time to get to work and I have digging to do. So I highly recommend, if you're sitting here wondering like, okay, why should I delve deeply into what hurts? It hurts. Why would I do that? It's going to level up your writing, and it's going to ask you to view your world that's, up here in the real world. It's going to ask you to reevaluate how you look at everything. And isn't that the whole point of what we're doing as writers? We're showing you, look at this world around me, so that you can see it anew and give yourself and your readers a kind of transformative experience. So I'll get off my soapbox now. I'm going to assume that you're all with me and we're all going to write into the underbelly from now on, as often as we can. So how Stranger Things teaches us the hero's journey is a mother. So I mentioned earlier that I have dug into the underbelly at times when it was not convenient to do so necessarily, because I'm raising small children, and what I'm dredging up from down there are painful memories that I had suppressed, right? But that were important to my experience of mothering as a whole present person who was able to be in the moment with my children and not, stuck in negative thought patterns and, self-criticism, self-sabotaging that I wouldn't have figured out if I hadn't delved into the Duende. But it was painful, I'm not going to lie. And so the show Stranger Things actually has a lot to say for that subject as well, in that Joyce goes searching for her son, right? And so a mother travels into the pit of hell, into the underbelly where death has kidnapped and nearly overtaken her youngest son in order to save her boy. For me, that's the heart. I go into the upside down to battle Duende because I am a mother living with mental illness, and I must save myself again and again in order to keep my children safe from the traumas my demons could inflict within myself and thereby against those I love. So I mentioned the golem earlier that's down in the underbelly, right? That's the part of ourselves, at least for me, that's the part of myself that, has potentially violent tendencies, might yell, might, lose my temper, right? And that all stems from a past that I have to be able to deal with in order to mother and love as a whole person. And so for me, going down into the Duende and bringing it onto the page is a life-saving, literally life-saving event, and so I write it down so that I can share it with others and, maybe save people from ever experiencing it in the first place. I think of my work as a kind of a surreal survival guide for girls and marginalized people. So, I would hope that I could give it to my daughter, maybe when she's a teenager, and she could know what her mom went through, and then she won't have to go through the same because she'll have the tools in place, right? And so my books then are an act of mothering. So what I want you to ask yourselves is, why would you go into the upside down? What goblins or golems or demons or monsters, what selves are you battling down there? And maybe not just battling, but what selves do you need to reclaim? Do you need to mother? Do you need to father? Do you need to brother or sister, right? Or whatever the relationship is, like, what do you need to do down in the underbelly, right? And why do you bring it back up to the page? So I hope that, after this lecture is over, sometime today or this week, you will sit down with your writing journal or type it into a new Word doc and ask yourself why you go down into the Duende, because I think knowing your purpose will give you the strength and fortitude that you need to do this. It's hard work, but it is so rewarding, right? So the hero's journey and deep mythical structure. Carl Jung says myth connects us, taps us into the collective unconscious, where we become part of the unseen world. Joseph Campbell says myth evokes a sense of awe, supports a cosmology, supports the structural order, and introduces individuals to spiritual enlightenment. Tolkien says myth is a universal language, that through the hero's quest, we all who partake in the myth go through a cathartic transformation. So this is exactly what I'm talking about here. And let's take a look at the hero's journey, which, yes, you absolutely can use in your poetry, right? So for those of you who write stories and write novels or write screenplays, right, you might be familiar with using the framework of the hero's journey in your writing, but poets might think, well, it's a lyric, it's a very short lyric. It's a sonnet. Like, why would I need the hero's journey? So I see every act of writing, at least for myself, as the hero's journey. So there's the call to action, right? So that is our why. Why do we go deep down, and why are we going to do battle with the Duende, right? Why are we going to take those risks and be vulnerable? Vulnerability, Brene Brown says, is showing up even when you're not able to control the outcome. Showing up even when you have no idea how the battle is going to end. You show up anyway. And so that takes risk, that takes courage, right? And that's, as a writer, that's how we can be thinking about the act of writing every time we sit down, right? Okay, sometimes maybe it's just fun and play, and that's fine too. But if you really do want to level up your writing and, write down truths that convey deep emotion to your readers, right? Then you need to be thinking about, what is it that you're trying to convey to them, right? What is it that you have to say? Why have you come to the arena, right? What are you battling here, and why? And who are you battling it for, right? So those are all questions. That's the call to adventure. The supernatural aid, that's the muse, right? But also it's just allowing ourselves to believe in ourselves and believe that there is a part of us that already knows what to say, and being open to that. And so I'm not going to read the whole hero's journey here. You can look up the hero's journey, and I want to make sure that we have time to get to the writing prompts and everything, and then questions if you have them. But down at the bottom is the abyss, right? The death. And then here's the crucial part. It's not just death, right? I had a student ask me in a workshop a couple of weeks ago, why would I want to go down into the underbelly? It's just like I'm dying, and then I'm dead, right? And then there's nothing. So what am I doing down there? Okay, I get that. I feel that so deeply. Like I said, I have demons of trauma, that have arisen because of trauma in my underbelly. So I know how awful it can be down there. And as someone who struggles with depression and other mental health concerns, I absolutely understand this, right? And so sometimes when we go down there, or if you're someone who has already gone down there quite often in your writing, and you often write the darkness, right? What happens is that we can get stuck. And it's like, we found this like little place in the wound where we just cover ourselves, with the infection, really, the pink infection. That's how I think of it. We're just like sitting in the wound, comfy. It hurts, but we're comfortable in that pain because we know it, right? And so what we actually need to do then is, if you're in the wound and you feel dead and you just feel like, no new writing is coming from it, my suggestion to you is that you might actually need to go deeper, right? And it feels counterintuitive. It's like, you might think I would say, no, come up for air. No, I don't think so. I think go deeper, because right now you're battling at the superficial level, right? If this is a deep wound, and again, I say this with the caveat that I am not a mental health professional. I am a writer and teacher. So please, if you are, battling mental health concerns, living with mental health concerns, please do seek professional help, and don't go into the underbelly if it's not safe for you to do that, right? But if it is safe for you to explore further, dig deeper, because you still have to pull out the plug, right? It's like the poison, it's the stinger, it's the infectious plug that's stuck down there. And so you might think that you're writing, stories or poems about your mother, or or about your father, or about, whatever the topic is. But it turns out that maybe you're actually angry at yourself in some ways. Maybe, right, there's just something down there that you need to see. So keep digging deeper, because only when you pull out that plug, that infection, that poison, can the true rebirth begin, right? And then that's where the transformation, the atonement, and the return with the gift of the goddess, is allowed for us. And that is what I consider what we get onto the page and what we share with readers. I don't think in terms of product, right? I think in terms of process. But if there is such a thing as a product, right, a book, right, this is the cycle that gets me there. From novel to novel, poetry collection to poetry collection, is this process of being willing to take the hero's journey again and again and again, sometimes into wounds that are very similar, right? But if I go deeper and I get to the plug, I'm going to find out what differentiates each story or each poem or each collection. And so I'm never afraid that, okay, in my weakest moments, maybe I'm afraid, but when I stop and really think about it and feel into it, I'm not afraid that I'm writing the same thing over and over, because I trust that this process is not just a repetitive cycle that's, staying in one place over and over, like on a stationary bike, right? But it's actually like a gyre, or like a cyclone, right? Like it's going in circles, and this is, something that is lifting me up each time. And so even though I might still revisit somewhere, I'm revisiting it from a higher plane of existence, a higher plane of understanding. Okay. The call. You know what? I'll read the call. I just want to make sure I'm going to have time, but I think we'll have time. So the call for Joyce as a mother is her child speaking to her through the Christmas lights. What is your call? Listen to the call toward the upside down. What is it in the underbelly that beckons you to climb down the ladder into the muck and sludge? Why trek into the terrifying death world of Duende? How long have you sensed the beasts of the upside down already reside, breath on the back of the neck, close to you and perhaps your loved ones? How did you first sense the tear in the seam? And who or what created that tear? Will you answer or refuse the call? What is your reason for the hero's journey? Why will you undertake this task? So these are questions that you can ask yourself as you're beginning to travel into the upside down. Okay, I want to share with you The Bear by Galway Kinnell, and we're going to go ahead and listen to the whole thing. It's 5 minutes, but he does such an amazing job of writing this Ars Poetica, or a poem that is about the art of writing a poem. It's a story that he tells. I don't know, how much he intended it as an Ars Poetica, but the last line of the poem makes me believe that he is absolutely aware that this is a metaphor for the act of writing. And so I want us to listen to these words and think about it as another Stranger Things, right? Another analogy for how we writers feel and what we go through when we're writing. So let's go ahead and listen to The Bear.
This is very stupid indeed. In late winter, I sometimes glimpse bits of steam coming up from some fault in the old snow, and bend close and see it is lung-colored, and put down my nose and know the chilly, enduring odor of bear. I take a wolf's rib and whittle it sharp at both ends, and coil it up and freeze it in blubber, and place it out on the fairway of the bears. And when it has vanished, I move out on the bear tracks, roaming in circles until I come to the first tentative dark splash on the earth. And I set out running, following the splashes of blood, wandering over the world. At the cut, gashed resting places, I stop and rest. At the crawl marks where he lay out on his belly to overpass some stretch of botchy ice, I lie out, dragging myself forward with bear knives in my fists. On the third day, I begin to starve. At nightfall, I bend down as I knew I would, at a turd sopped in blood, and hesitate, and pick it up, and thrust it in my mouth, and gnash it down, and rise, and go on running. On the seventh day, living by now on bear blood alone, I can see his upturned carcass far out ahead, a scraggled, steamy hulk, the heavy fur riffling in the wind. I come up to him and stare at the narrow-spaced, petty eyes, the dismayed face laid back on a shoulder, the nostrils flared, catching, perhaps, the first taint of me as he died. I hack a ravine in his thigh, and eat, and drink, and tear him down his whole length, and open him, and climb in, and close him up after me against the wind, and sleep. And dream of lumbering flat-footed over the tundra, stabbed twice from within, splattering a trail, and dream of wandering flat-footed over the tundra, splattering a trail behind me, splattering it out no matter which way I lurch, no matter which parabola of bare transcendence, which dance of solitude I attempt, which gravity-clutched leap, which trudge, which groan, until one day I totter and fall on this stomach that has tried so hard to keep up, to digest the blood as it leaked in, to break up and digest the bone itself. And now the breeze blows over me, blows off the hideous belches of ill-digested bear blood and rotted stomach, and the ordinary wretched odor of bear, blows across my sore, lulled tongue a song or screech, until I think I must rise up and dance. And I lie still. I awaken, I think. Marsh lights reappear. Geese come trailing again up the flyway. In her ravine under old snow, the dam bear lies, licking lumps of smeared fur and drizzly eyes into shapes with her tongue. And one hairy-souled trudge stuck out before me, the next groaned out, the next. The rest of my days I spend wondering what anyway was that sticky infusion, that rank flavor of blood, that poetry by which I lived.
That rank flavor of blood, that poetry by which I lived. Right? So the speaker has gone so deep into the upside down that he's exhausted, dying. The spark of fire, that which he has tracked and chased through the snow, that for which he has killed and ingested all manner of excretion, is in his grasp, but he is too spent to fan the flame. And when he comes to transformed, completely reborn, he spends the remainder of his days trying to understand what he experienced. He has become the bear, making the hairy-souled trudge home. What sustained him nearly killed him, and now it has overtaken him completely. He is the bear. This is Duende, right? This is what I'm asking us to contend with. See if I can change the slide. In the upside down, again, I think of Stranger Things and Will Byers' descent into the upside down. Even when he reemerges, he carries traces of the monstrous otherworld within himself. Consider the scene in which a few months after his return home, and okay, I'm sorry, I am giving another spoiler here. His bathroom momentarily transforms into the grotesque upside down, parallels juxtaposing, and he gags on a leech-like creature from that underbelly, spitting it into the sink. And then just as quickly, everything flickers around him and he's back again in his real world. So while it can be difficult to find the entrance into the upside down, once you found it, once you've gone down there, it has changed you completely, right? And so you will have material to write because you have done battle with the Duende, right? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and skip over some of this so that we have time for questions. Oh, let me go back to this one. Oops, sorry about that. Let's see. Let me get back here a second. Okay. Sorry. Let's see. I didn't mean to do that. I meant to hit that. Okay. In 1904, Kafka wrote to Pollack, "I think we ought to only read the kinds of books that wound and stab us. If the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow on the head, what are we even reading it for? So that it will make us happy, as you write? Good Lord, we would be happy precisely if we had no books. And the kind of books that make us happy are the kind we could write ourselves if we had to. But we need the books that affect us like a disaster, that grieve us deeply, like a death of someone we loved more than ourselves, like being banished into forests far from everyone, like a suicide. A book must be the axe for the frozen sea inside us. That is my belief." So the possibility here is that not only should we read the kind of books that wake us up to our world, right, and to each other, but write those kind of books as well. That's what we're doing in the Upside Down. So some of the ways that we can enter the Upside Down: word lists are as steps down. So I recently worked with a writing client as a coach who had just finished writing a book about the death of someone that she loved very dearly. And she said that she was able to write the whole collection, really a stunning full-length collection of poetry, in just 3 months, right? And it's because she was taking a workshop that was all about just word lists. You were given a list of words and you had to write a poem every day that used those words. So it's kind of like the Wheelie Poe writers who set up constraints, and we can think of as forms, right? These word lists or these constraints, they're rules that we tell ourselves we have to follow. And then what happens is we trick our subconscious to coming out to play, right? Because we're so busy thinking about, okay, where's this word go? Where is this word going to go? How am I going to fit this in, right? And so we're thinking about the components of the puzzle that we're creating, that we're actually allowing sometimes material that we wouldn't have consciously been able to bring to the poem or to the story. So erasure is another one. And forms like sestinas, right, that have a very strict word count, 6 words that you have to use in a repeated form. So what I would recommend, though, is that you're using these forms and these constraints to help get the material out, realizing that once it is out on the page, there will be more crafting to do. And sometimes taking away the form, taking away the constraint, saying, okay, I brought this to the page as a sestina, but it doesn't have to stay a sestina or a sonnet or a villanelle or a pantoum or any other form, right? Or I can change these words now, right? They helped me get the story that I needed to tell onto the page, but they might not be the best diction. And so there's a lot of crafting that can happen once it's up on the page. But my goal in this lecture was to help you figure out ways of getting it up, right? And dredging the muck. And, and also knowing that it's okay to just play in the mud, and so I have another client who I had to give her permission again and again and again to just be able to play in the mud, because she felt like if she wasn't coming out with a beautiful polished poem at the end of, a 2-week series of writing and revision, then what was she even doing? And it's like, oh no, Your work may stay very ugly for a very long time. And at the end, there might, even there is no end. Ellen Bryant Voigt says it's all a draft until we die, right? But, even when it's published, there might still be elements of it that are monstrous, that are ugly. And you know what? That's okay, because your readers need that. Your readers need to know that there's someone out there in the world who has experienced what they've experienced, and they're not alone, So for those of you that need the permission, like, it's okay. You're going to be playing in the mud. It's going to be dirty. It's going to be ugly. That's all right. You're doing a good job. That's what we're here to do, right? We don't have to pretend to have it all figured out. So I want to give you a few writing prompts, and then I think we'll have time for a question or two. So the first one is to follow the mythical structure of the hero's journey to compose your descent into the upside down. It could be a psychological descent, one steeped in metaphor and dream world, as in the bear, right? Or one that you recall from a traumatic or painful event in your life or the life of someone you love. Imbue the world of your piece with grotesqueries. What do I mean by that? That is Galway Kinnell's, the speaker eating the bear turds and things like that, right? And the blood and getting in, being inside of the bear, so it was filled with the grotesque. And that's what I'm talking about. At the end of the day, that is still a very ugly poem, right? But it's doing a lot of psychic work. And that, the first time I read it, I wept because I could relate so deeply to the feeling, right, of going into these dark spaces and battling the Duende. And so that somebody else knew what it felt like was a revelation. So sometimes the grotesque and the ugly, just like in a lot of surreal paintings, right, is going to evoke deep emotion. So don't be afraid of it. At the same time, you want to show some constraint and be aware of your audience, right? And so, you don't want to go over the top unless that's your genre and that your readers are expecting that kind of over the top. So like Quentin Tarantino and things like that, like if your readers are expecting you to write, Sweeney Todd or something like that, by all means, go for it. But otherwise, you do want to, I like the adage, when you're writing very hot material, very emotionally hot material, when you write it colder, right? When you pare back a bit and make it just, less emotional on the page, it will communicate more emotion to your reader in the end. So write it colder. So there's balance, I guess. Show us the monstrous creatures that reside there, or the beastly aspects of yourself or your fellow humans. Show us the dark side. Writing prompt 2, create your own Christmas lit homemade Ouija wallpaper. What does your transmitter to the upside down look like? How does it function? Who in the underbelly are you communicating with? Why are they calling you? Will you answer the call? These writing prompts, so I'm thinking if you go onto my website and sign up for my newsletter, and then send me an email, from that newsletter response and ask for these writing prompts, I can send them to you in a PDF form so that you don't have to worry about trying to write them all down really quickly. So that's just jennifergivon.com, and sign up for my newsletter. Email me when you get that response from my newsletter that you're all good and signed up, and then I'll send you these writing prompts. In order to subvert expectations, consider the order of information in which you allow readers into the fullness of your story. Lure them in with startling imagery and details, but do not cut off their heads with the full shock of what is happening until they are sure the poem is about one thing. Then fling open death's door, release the beast, pull the rug out from beneath your reader. Now is the time to stand up and face the beast head on, even if the beast is ourselves. So this last slide, begin anywhere, begin again, just begin, right? That was something really important to me because I withdrew from social media for a while. I had gone out there in the world with my bright, shining heart, and had gotten some, difficult criticism that I had to learn to take in stride. But, I withdrew for a little while because it really was painful. So I understand, the battles that we're doing here are painful. But then I got back up and I got back to the page and I finished another novel. I finished another poetry collection. And within 6 months of making that decision to get back up and send my heart back out there again, both my novel and my poetry collection were picked up for publication, and they will both be forthcoming next year in 2022. So I cannot encourage you enough. Just get started wherever you are, digging into what hurts, right? Knowing that you are supported, you are safe, and getting that onto the page in a way that will communicate with your readers. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing the slides so that I can answer any questions you had.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes, you showed so much vulnerability and strength at the same time with your talk, and I really appreciate that. I had noticed that your book was reviewed by the Washington Post, and hearing you talk about putting like the Duende, these dark things into your books, like how does it feel to like make that so public and then to see it in such like a mainstream publication talking about that?
Yeah, that is such a good question. So part of the way that I've been able to remain vulnerable, again, I'm going to go to Brené Brown. If you haven't watched, she has a special on Netflix. I highly recommend it. It's so applicable to writers. Or if you look up any of her talks on shame and vulnerability. But so part of what I've done is set boundaries, and that is so important. And one of the ways, the craft ways that I do that, I mentioned earlier, is I create characters, I create protagonists, I create speakers who are the, first person I or close third person, right? So you're getting inside their head, you're getting inside their heart. I'm able to share my truths, my experiences, but I also know that I've created a boundary. So I can fictionalize what I need to fictionalize. I can change. Like I have so much power and strength that I might not necessarily have had in the lived experience. But now as the writer, right, I am a goddess, I have that power. And so knowing that it creates just enough of a barrier that I can share my heart, but I'm not letting the criticism or the pain back in. And so that is one way that you can do it, and only share what you're comfortable sharing. Sometimes you'll write a piece and that one wasn't necessarily meant for publication, and that's okay, but it was a stepping stone to the piece then that is going to be published, and it will contain elements of what you dug up using the Duende, right? But it won't necessarily be all the pieces. Right. Yeah. And so that is your prerogative as a writer.
Is that part of the revision process? Like when you revise, you don't necessarily go back to that underbelly. Is that when you sort of step back?
Yeah. So that's a great question. For me, revision, even in writing one book, one poem, one story, one essay, or one book, right? I might have to go through and do that hero's journey again and again. So there will be revision that takes place. And then I send it to a trusted friend, a trusted first reader. And then they make some comments that, I didn't realize, I actually didn't dig deep enough. Okay, here we go. Light my candle, take my breath, do what I need to put on my music. I am going back in, folks, right? Yeah. And so revision of a poem, of a story, might happen that I'm going back into the Duende several times before I finally put it out there. I would say that you're no longer going into the dark spaces, and I call them dark spaces, knowing that there's light as well, but they're just hard spaces, as many times as it takes.
Yeah. Do you depend on friends or readers to help you know when it's time to say you've gone far enough?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think many writers can relate to this. Like part of why we're writers is that we tend to be compulsive about, about things, and we can spend long periods of time, changing one word. Like we can spend an hour on one word, right? So yeah, absolutely. I can get obsessed with the story and I'll want to stay there forever. So I send it out first to a set of trusted friends, usually like my mom and a really good friend or two. And then I'll send it out to a wider group of beta readers. And then I'll send it to my agent and then my editor, and then there's the copy editor, right? So it's going through, and by that point, you know, I'm gaining more and more distance, right? This is a process that's taking, you know, with my first novel, it was a process that took 10 years.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
with this third novel now, I've streamlined the process a bit because I've learned so much about my craft. I've honed my craft. So this one I started in 2018, and I'm going through the final round of revisions right now. So 3 years, I would say, for this for a novel. Yeah.
The more I learn about the world of publishing, the more I learn that it's such an intense process.
Exactly.
And a lot of, like, you read the acknowledgments in the back of a book, and often there's just so many people mentioned.
Absolutely.
And they say it takes a village to raise a child. I sometimes think it must be true for books as well.
I love that. That is such a great way to look at it. I love that. I called my most recent book, which is about the folk magic of people of color. So I called my team my coven, you know, and that's how I saw it, that my support system. But yeah, it's always about at least 10 people on my team, you know.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's freeing as well to know that it's a process that may take years, and that your book may remain in this kind of flaying in the mud state for a year or 2 or 3 or whatever it takes, right? And that you get to go back again and again. In some ways it's daunting, but you know, if you stay, you know, courageous and strong and persistent and gritty, I mean, that is, I think that if you have grit, right, that is the number one way that you would just keep going, because, you know, your first draft is just getting the ideas onto the page, right? And your final draft might look completely different.
Yeah, thank you. So tell me about, you have a novel coming out next year, is that right?
I do. It's called River Woman, River Demon. And it's about a woman whose husband is accused of murdering their friend. And as she begins to delve deeply into it, she begins to suspect that she might be involved in it and didn't realize. And this is a book that is a genre crossing book, as all of my works are. I can't stay in any genre. I'm a poet at heart. So it's a thriller, it's literary fiction, you know, it's Latinx, indigenous fiction about the magic of people of color. So it's doing all kinds of fun stuff, maybe a little horror in there as well.
Yeah.
But I'm very, very excited to share this one, River Woman, River Demon, in 2022.
That sounds exciting. 2022 is sooner than it seems.
Right?
We're getting there.
I know, like 2 months away. I think I'm not sure when in 2022, but follow me in my newsletter and I'll keep you posted, or I'm on social
everybody
media.
go to Jennifer's website and sign up to her newsletter. You also have a book of writing prompts, which I think a lot of the people listening to this lecture would be interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. Each of the prompts is like a mini lecture, just like the one I've given you here, where there are craft elements, you know, quotes and bits of poems. I'm also giving you encouragement, and then I'm giving you a writing prompt so that every day that you write, you have something new to think about and write about. And I have, you know, someone who bought the book like 2 months ago has said that she's already gotten like almost a chat book out of it, you know, following it. So yeah, absolutely. It's called Regenerate, Prompts to Unlock Transformation.
That's great. And there should be a link to that underneath the video for everybody watching this. So we're out of time. I want to thank you again, Jennifer, for the wonderful lecture. And thank you, everybody, for coming today. If you have any questions for me or for Authors Publish, you can email support@authorspublish.com. You can probably get in contact with Jennifer by visiting her website. There should be a link to it. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you again, Jennifer. Is there any last thing you want to say to the audience?
Just get to writing right now. Don't give up.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.